thank you, Bev, and to PowHer for bringing us together for this very important conversation. We're reminded by the current circumstances that when a crisis unfolds like this, those who are most financially vulnerable, including women, are typically hit the hardest, which drives home the importance of tackling the pay equity problem. As Bev mentioned, I'm an attorney at Legal Momentum, the Women's Legal Defense and Education Fund. It's a women's rights organization that's been working for about 50 years now to advance gender equality through the law. And in our work, we found that achieving legitimate pay equity for women and other marginalized groups requires a comprehensive approach that addresses the multiple factors that contribute to the persistent wage gap. And other speakers have covered many of these more in depth, but I thought I'd provide some context for the legislation that we're going to speak about by providing an overview about some of these contributing factors. So we have overt discrimination and implicit bias, lack of transparency surrounding compensation. So that means that employers take advantage of secrecy around pay to create salary discrepancies. We have unequal distribution of caregiving responsibilities and the issue of pregnancy. There's occupational segregation, which is one of the hardest to tackle. And we're also looking at overall depressed wages for workers. Moving on to slide 46. The women's rights community and lawmakers have been drafting and enacting legislation to tackle each of these factors. And Sarah discussed key victories from the past years, which will hopefully go a long way towards addressing the systemic discrimination factor as well as others. Today, I'm going to provide an overview of legislation we are working on to address other contributing factors, namely the transparency issue and the implicit bias issue. The bill we're working on in New York State, as well as counties and cities in New York, is a compensation range disclosure bill, which would require employers to do several things. First, it would require mandatory disclosure of compensation for any employment opportunity. So all private employers in New York State would have to disclose in writing or electronically the compensation or range, the benefits, and other form of compensation when issuing a new employment opportunity. That could be in a job posting, a flyer, an email. Second, it would also require disclosure to current employees. So an employer would have to provide that same information to existing employees regarding their current position, and they would have to do that at several junctures. There would be an anti-retaliation provision, so an employer couldn't refuse to interview, hire, promote, or otherwise penalize anyone for asserting their rights. The bill would require DOL enforcement, so the New York State Department of Labor would have to create a complaint mechanism, investigate violations, impose civil penalties, amongst several other things. And it defines range of compensation as the range that an employer actually relied upon in setting compensation. And there are various details as to how that can be figured out. Moving on to slide 47, as I had mentioned, the purpose of this bill is to address several of the contributing factors to pay inequity. So first, one of our main goals is to eliminate overt discrimination and implicit bias in salary setting. Too often, employers inject their overt or implicit bias into the hiring process, factoring in an applicant's gender or race when setting compensation amount. This may be done consciously or unconsciously, but studies have shown that women are offered lower salaries because some employers think men are more competent, often white men, that men are more competent, or that women are less focused or committed, often because of pregnancy or childcare obligations. Proving discrimination in this context can be extremely difficult. And so one key purpose of our bill is to eliminate the opportunity for employers to use gender bias, racial bias, and other forms of bias to shape their salary decisions. A second main goal is to enhance transparency to level the playing field for women. And through various studies and based on our own experience assisting women through Legal Momentum's National Helpline, it's evident that women applying for new positions who are in the dark about salary are likely to ask for less. And this is in part driven by the fact that women have historically earned less and thus typically have less leverage in negotiating salary. And that's part of the goal of the salary history ban that Sarah mentioned earlier. Research also shows that women are more willing to negotiate and more successful at negotiating when applicants are informed about compensation, benefits, or conditions of employment. So providing this information about salary upfront creates transparency that's likely to put women in a better position to negotiate and advocate for themselves. And this also applies more broadly to people of color.
So Seher, how are we going to get this done?
Exactly.
Right? And we're almost out of time.
I know, and I'll be quick.
No. What are we going to do?
We're on slide 48. So obviously legislative priorities have shifted, but the pandemic has also shed light on the urgent need to address these underlying inequities. So as we try to push forward to enact this law in New York State, there are several things that individuals and advocates can do to support this initiative. You can engage in outreach with your legislators and policymakers in your county or at the state level. You can share information about the benefits of this type of legislation with your network, raise visibility through social media and communications platforms, and really just educate your peers about the importance of pay transparency. I think part of the purpose of this bill is to start really changing the culture of around how we treat pay and how, you know, all the secrecy surrounding pay, and to really break that wide open so we can create more opportunities for women and people of color.